Yeah, I don't know if we want to start off and we can do a little bit of introduction and overview. I guess we have 1 more minute actually before 10, so we'll not be too overeager here.
That's right. I just started the recording, Hedy, so that we don't forget. So hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Welcome. If you want to take a moment to put your name and position and organization in the chat, we'd love to know who you are. Oh, and I would like not to be called Zoom 13. Let me work on that.
Greetings, Jennifer from Hemet. Hemet does great work. And Kimmy, we're glad you're able to join from the Department of Ed. Got David from Pasadena. And Oscar from Montebello, and we got Ventura in the room as well. So Cecilia, I think we should get going. Hi, so let's go to the next slide. So I'm Hedy Chang. I'm the Executive Director of Attendance Works, and Cecilia, you can introduce yourself. That was the end.
Hi, everyone. Cecilia Leong. I'm the Vice President of Programs for Attendance Works.
And so we are a national initiative that really promotes advancing student success and closing equity gaps by reducing chronic absence. But we also work at the local and state level. Cecilia and I both actually live and work in California. I've been here for many, many years. And so California is actually a place where we do pretty in-depth work, working both with the California Department of Ed and also working with a number of districts throughout the state. Our goal is about advancing better policy, nurturing proven and promising practice, promoting meaningful, effective communications, catalyzing needed research. You can go to our website. We're essentially a giveaway strategy. So what we know is that reducing chronic absence isn't rocket science, but you also don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time you're trying to figure out. You want to learn from what's working, what's not working. Particularly this year, it's made it even more important for us to be able to learn from peers because we're actually having to adapt to so much. Attendance Works, our goal is to put as much as we can out on our website when we've learned it, and then encourage folks like you to take and tailor it to your own realities. Next slide. So I know a number of you have already shared your community or your school district. So glad that you did that. Can you also share kind of a hope for something that you want to learn from this session? Is there something in particular that motivated you to show up and you want to make sure that you walk out of this session having heard about, because that'll make sure that we speak to it. So if you're just joining, why don't you also share your name, your role, your community or district, and we'd love to hear about what are some of the things that people are hoping they might learn and gain out of showing up to the session. So I know folks are still joining us. We're having folks just say your name, your role, your community, and if there's something in particular that you're hoping you might be able to learn from this session, would be love to hear that. That way we would make sure that we can address your whatever questions you might have coming in around attendance. And every question is a thoughtful and important question, I will say, in this world of attendance. So I think we really appreciate when people come in having questions. So Cecilia, I'm going to keep going and then people can continue to ponder that question. And I wanted to offer up that as we have been really working on this issue and thinking about how to adapt to COVID-19, we've ended up coming up with a real framework for thinking about this work. And these are based on the typical ways in which chronic absence and attendance data have gotten used. We've used it for allocating funding, but this is actually a moment where we want to really hold schools, districts harmless from funding cliffs, and we need to invest in re-engagement and recovery using chronic absence and poor attendance data to notice when you need to actually have greater investments. We're actually pleased to see that that's been happening with the COVID relief recovery dollars that are out there. You have to really ensure compliance. That's a traditional use has been about ensuring compliance with compulsory ed. Often that has involved the legal system. And what we want to really do is actually get people thinking about what are alternatives to action, legal action. Chronic absence is actually a sign and a symptom that kids have been exposed to trauma. The key to addressing trauma is not to say what's wrong with you, but to say what happened and how can I help you? So alternatives to legal action are even more essential at this time, when if you threaten with punitive response, that is usually what's wrong with you, not what happened to you and how can I help you. We've thought about chronic absence, and in California, it is part of our accountability metrics, but this is not a moment when you want to engage in high stakes accountability. You want to really be thinking though about how do you publish data, make it available so folks can use it to allocate resources, to examine what's going on. And actually this year, people are going to need to use data to think about how do they need to even improve their data and their data systems, since this move to blended learning has definitely created some challenges around data systems and data tracking and monitoring. The last three things are the things that we think are most essential to focus on during COVID-19. You want to be using early warning. Chronic absence is an early warning. So that you can notice when kids are starting to miss out on school, and everyone can take action. I noticed a number of people here are from after school programs. After school and expanded learning is part of that team of folks who can notice with school teams, be part of school teams that are noticing when you have challenges with attendance and who needs more support. We can also use attendance data as for continuous improvement. If kids don't show up for the things that we're offering, then it is a real sign that what we're doing isn't quite working in the way we intended. And this is really about advancing equity and making sure that we can remove barriers to equitable access to opportunities and supports. Next slide, please. And if you're just joining, please feel free to add both their name, your community, and a question. And again, I really appreciate the question from Joy Burnett with Gateway Community Charters about what can expanded learning do to support regular day attendance. And I promise we will come back to that issue. Right now, I'm given a bit of an overview of sort of key concepts. So we are talking about the term chronic absence. We actually think there are multiple metrics for attendance. Average daily attendance is one, which is how many kids show up to school each day. Truancy, which is really about unexcused absences, is another metric. What we are really talking about and focusing on is chronic absence. That's missing so much school for any reason that a student is academically at risk. It includes excused, unexcused, and suspensions. If we think what happens in classrooms is valuable, then not showing up is also a problem and a challenge because you're missing out on instruction. And we define that as missing 10% or more of the school day. Chronic absence is both a leading indicator and a cause of educational inequity. It's a leading indicator of challenges that kids and families might be facing that are affecting their school experience, whether that's lack of access to transportation, unstable housing, poor nutrition, lack of access to healthcare. But then not only do those things affect a kid's academic success, but if kids continually miss out on valuable instruction, then that's actually perpetuating, causing, and exacerbating the educational inequities that may already being affected by the challenge that caused kids to be missing so much school in the first place. Next slide. So improving attendance matters, and Cecilia, yeah, just do all the clicks here. Because it matters every point in a child's life. There is now a whole a plethora of data that shows, starting in pre-K, K and first, chronic absence actually can predict the inability to read by the end of third grade, which then, and then kids who are chronically absent in middle school, whether you started in elementary schools or maybe you start in middle school, they actually have lower achievement, especially as subjects, particularly like math or science, get more scaffolded. Missing a bit of school in the beginning starts to really throw you off because you don't have the concepts and the foundation to continue learning. And then chronic absence becomes really an early sign that kids are more likely to drop out. Next slide. It's a sign that positive conditions for learning might be missing. And that's true in any mode of instruction, whether that's in person, virtual, or some hybrid. Kids come to school when they feel physically and emotionally healthy and safe, when they feel that sense of belonging, connection, support, when they feel academically challenged, engaged, and when they're surrounded by adults and students who are have that emotional confidence to support that. And when I say school, I mean the school experience. So after school is very much a part of that. So if in or outside of school, you create that sense of belonging and support, then kids want to show up. At the same time, when you see high levels of chronic absence, it can be a real indicator that kids aren't feeling these conditions of learning. And, you know, we close schools to keep kids healthy and safe during COVID. As we are reopening schools, we have to look at kids not showing up as a key sign that maybe they don't feel healthy and safe. Maybe that's because the school really isn't, or maybe it's because the protocols that you have not been communicated, so families are concerned, so they're not showing up. So that's why when you see high levels of chronic absence, you really want to have the capacity to unpack whether one or more of these different issues are becoming a problem, and then you can problem solve so that you can figure out what would it take for kids to be back in school. Next slide. We are actually seeing some very troubling data, and you might all in your own districts have been seeing this, that chronic absence is actually on the rise. I'm offering up data. I know we're in California. I was with Connecticut earlier this day, but I actually know I'm in California right now. But Connecticut is one of the states, is the first state to actually release statewide chronic absence data. So it gives us a picture at scale of what is happening. They also have had a long history of investing in accurate data. So I'm more certain of how they're thinking about stuff. And they've actually been pretty thoughtful about how to define a day of attendance. From that data, you're seeing this incredible increase, you know, from 12 to 21% in chronic absence overall. But then you're looking like at English language learners where chronic absence doubled, or for kids who are in free and reduced who are living in poverty, chronic absence more than doubled. And then you're seeing kids who already who are homeless already had extraordinarily high levels, and you're seeing even more challenges with attendance. So we are really worried about how the impact of the pandemic has exacerbated chronic absence rates. And we believe these trends from what we've seen in California. We do work with some districts. We've seen some similar trends in those districts. And I would just add that we're also seeing transition grades, kindergartners, ninth graders, especially affected. Next slide. So another implication of COVID-19 is that we actually have to expand how we measure the opportunity to learn. We not only need to always make sure we have working and updated contact information. That means we can't just have this collected at the beginning of the school year. You actually have to collect and make sure you have updated contact information multiple times in the school year, because families may be moving in order to deal with the consequences of COVID. We need to make sure families have connectivity and access, because we are in blended learning for a long time to come. As much as I wish we could all assume in person is just going to happen, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think in some ways, blended learning could be a real opportunity if we can know when kids are having trouble getting there, to make sure kids continue to have access to learning, even when they face barriers to getting to school, whether that's because you're quarantined or you have health issues, or because you have other challenges. But that means kids have connectivity and access to the core resource materials. So you can look at working contact, connectivity and access. What's kids' attendance when you're in person? What's their participation in distance learning? And when you have all of those things in place, and you know a student has a relationship to someone in the school, a positive relationship, that's what's going to increase your opportunity to learn, because it's what helps make sure kids show up to school. It's also make sure that you have the connections so that if something happens and you need to check in and problem solve, that you have the capacity to do so. Next slide. This is just a little more depth about adding these metrics of contact, connectivity, relationships, participation in person, in distance learning, that now are new metrics on top of chronic absence, which districts are already required, schools are already required to monitor and report on. And for us to do this work, we really have to expand to these new metrics in order to notice who's missing too much school. Next slide.
And Hedy, before we go on, one of the participants asked about getting our slides. And certainly you will have these definitions in the slides. They're in the conference folder, so feel free to take it afterwards.
Great. Thank you, Cecilia. Ultimately, what we need to do is we need to create this multi-tiered system of support. And this, everyone talks about multi-tiered systems of support, so I suspect it's a familiar phrase. What may be a little different about our tier, which it's additive, you have tier 1, and if tier 1 isn't sufficient, you add tier 2 and tier 3. But what we also added in was these foundational whole school supports. And these are the core practices. So thank you, Cecilia, that are building blocks of what happens in school that may not always be about attendance, but in fact, ensure attendance can happen. And when they're missing, you see poor attendance. When they're in place, you usually see attendance improve. These are things like having access to learning support. So we know, for example, chronic absence is often much higher among kids who are in special ed. And I think that's actually often a matter of the fact that kids in special ed don't have the learning supports that they need, they deserve, they should have. It can also be whether attendance, whether you have access to technology and equipment now. That's a core foundational building block. It's not necessarily about attendance, but if you don't have it, especially in in-person learning, you might not. Another example, though, this is homerooms and advisories. Now, that's been a traditional thing that schools have had. But not all schools have had it. And now that you're in COVID and you really need to make sure that kids have access to a relationship to someone, this is particularly middle and high school, that they can connect with if there's a challenge, that becomes even important. I will add, some of these things are new. Like, I think before COVID, everyone kind of knew usually it wasn't too hard for them to know what their classes were. Now that we're moving to hybrid or distance learning, both kids and families need to understand when our kids are supposed to be where. And if you've got multiple kids, it's not always easy to track. This kid's supposed to be online, this kid's supposed to be in person. These are building blocks, but you really can't show up to school unless you know that you're supposed to be in school in the first place. So what we used to take for granted sometimes, now we can't take so much for granted. Next slide. This is also an example. We have this on our website where you can go in and you can think about what are all the different things that can have your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And what we found that's really important is that schools and districts need to map across departments to see what of these aspects are in place or not in place. And I would include including what's possible in your expanded learning programs, because it's kids and families experience a whole school experience. They don't even know sometimes the ways we divide ourselves in schools. But when we map across the departments, it's possible to actually put in place in a robust and a coordinated approach to putting in place these tiered supports. Next slide. We also particularly want to call attention to that there are some particular tier 2 intervention strategies that we've known to work. Assigning care and mentors, student attendance and success plans, actually expanded learning opportunities that create opportunities for kids to be in enrichment and in classes that they enjoy and connect are really important. Adding attendance goals and supports to IEPs, because a lot of times that then becomes a focal point for thinking about what's happening with kids in special ed, and then having small group supports. These are examples of pretty key early intervention strategies that can be added. Next slide. We just encourage you, as you think about what you might put in place, you also have to align the interventions to reasons for absence. So Cecilia, yeah. So if it's lack of connectivity, then you want to think about what are those interventions. If it's that parents don't understand the impact of absences, which can be an issue, then you want to create an education campaign. If the issue is that parent work schedules are out of sync, then you want to add more opportunities where kids can be in and have access to learning. And this is again a place where before after school programming can be really an asset. Next slide. So I think I'm turning it over to you at this point, Cecilia, to begin talking us through our newest resource, which is our Pathways to Engagement and our toolkit for COVID-19 recovery.
Absolutely. So thanks, Hedy, for that wonderful leveling up and background. So we are releasing in stages our newest toolkits to Pathways to Engagement. And this is really to assist schools and districts and their partners in planning for bringing back students and re-engaging with those who have been most disengaged. So we have 4 recommended steps in this, and we'll go through different parts of the toolkit to give you a flavor of what's happening. But the first recommended step is really establishing a team. And here's what we mean by that. So we've long known that it's very hard to reduce chronic absence when you're doing it on your own. If you're a team of me, myself, and I, and you're seeing the levels of chronic absenteeism that Hedy was sharing in your school district, with rates more than doubling for some of our student groups, you really need to invest in having a team approach. And by a team approach, what we mean is a team that isn't doing all the work themselves, but they're organizing and facilitating a school-wide strategy. So they're not doing all the work, but they're planning and mobilizing others to improve outcomes for all students. So we have 5 functions of a team that we talk about. One is that first and most important piece. It's organizing the multi-tiered attendance strategy so that you're moving towards prevention and early intervention and not waiting until absences add up astronomically. Second, it's using your attendance data, including all the new metrics that Hedy was talking about earlier, to assess which groups of students have higher or lower levels of absence and may need additional support. The third piece, which we think about, is identifying the barriers and inequities that are preventing students from coming to school and mobilizing everyone in the school community, including our extended learning time partners, to address attendance. And finally, what we most need to do, because we're pressed for time, is we need to know that what we're doing is making a difference, and we need to either adapt it to be better, expand it if we're doing a great job, or just abandon some things that aren't working for our students and families. So those are the 5 functions. And because of time, we're not going to share this video with you, but you'll have the link in the slides when you download the presentation. And I would encourage you to watch it. It's really inspiring to watch school teams in action and how folks are working together. So none of the people in our video are actors. They're real people in real teams in real schools. So let's talk about your teams. So really there are three essential types of folks that you want to have in a school level team that's addressing attendance. You want leadership. So it's often a principal or an assistant principal who's leading the team because it really matters to have the attention of the top person or persons. And then you want to have people with expertise. And it often can be someone like the school nurse, counselor, social worker, and I think expanded learning staff are really wonderful additions because they bring that third piece, which is a real perspective into what's happening with students that teachers may not always have, and they are able to bring viewpoints from the community. So if you're working in multiple schools as an expanded learning provider, it's a great opportunity to get invited, get yourself invited and included onto the school teams. So one of the things that happens in schools though, we know that people have multiple teams, and it doesn't mean that you have to create a totally brand new team in order to address attendance or chronic absence. You may be able to, once you've mapped the teams and taken a look at who's doing what, that there may be ways in which you can incorporate the responsibilities for attendance into an existing team. So many districts have strong PBIS teams. Many in California are running MTSS teams. So there are ways that you can incorporate and not make more work and still organize the attendance functions. It's perfect. So I know many of you in the intros are from all over California, and would be really curious to hear what you are doing in your schools and communities to address attendance. So if you would take a moment and go to the chat and share with us, are you addressing attendance with a standalone attendance team or perhaps a PBIS team? Right? We've seen many of those integrations be very successful, addressing attendance and behavior in the same team. We've seen lots of MTSS teams or RTI teams. Sometimes it's a case management team or a cost team or something else. We're always interested in seeing the inventiveness. So Hedy, if you see some of the responses, would you help me read what folks are saying? What are they doing in their schools? Oh, and you're muted. I really do want to hear you.
I thought I had unmuted, but I'm going between different things. Anyway, so a couple people said PBIS and MTSS. And then Jennifer, so PBS, RTI, re-engagement teams. It seems like a lot of folks are more integrating as opposed to standalone, which we actually think makes a ton of sense. Or if a standalone, it's almost a subcommittee of a larger committee. Sometimes you have to have separate attention, but I think that's great. So seeing this connection within these broader MTSS, RTI, and PBIS is really important.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so Hedy and I have the privilege of working all across the nation as well as here in California. And we've watched and coached a lot of teams. And there's some common pitfalls that we've seen. So thankfully, from your responses, you're not establishing a team that operates in isolation. You're integrating into larger efforts. So thank goodness for that, right? But it's a very common pitfall. The second one we see often is just the failure to rally the entire school to support prevention and early intervention. So much of prevention happens at the classroom level, but we often see teachers not really being engaged or mobilized, although that's changed with COVID, so that's great. Another common pitfall is assuming that communicating about an absence is an intervention. So it is an action, and it's an important one that we're legally mandated to do, but that doesn't actually address a barrier or that a family may be facing. It's just communication. Sometimes we focus only on students with the most absences. We're starting to see that change, but it's still a tendency that we all have. And we also tend to invest in case management as the sole strategy. It's a great strategy, but it's not sufficient. If you're dealing with hundreds of students, you cannot case manage your way out of chronic absenteeism. And then another one is jumping to solutions without really understanding what's going on behind the absences. We hear a lot, I, as the head of programs, hear a lot of inquiries for that magic bullet, that solution that will solve everything, regardless of what's happening with the student. And that just doesn't work. And finally, the last common pitfall we see is that the team composition just doesn't reflect the demographics, the perspectives, or the realities of the student population. So those are common pitfalls, just pointing them out so hopefully you avoid them. Hedy, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, this is something that we've also been seeing, is that especially in fast changing communities, sometimes the teaching staff have been there a longer time. And so what they know and what the realities they know aren't exactly quite what the new community that's coming in, but they're so accustomed to knowing what's going on, they don't actually realize, they don't now reflect and understand the realities. So it's not intentional, but it happens because of these demographics. And I will say that one of the other challenges is under COVID, and you guys have probably all heard this phrase, we're all in the same storm, but the craft that we're riding on looks really different. Some of us are on yachts, some of us are on sailboats, some of us on rafts, some of us are on, an inner tube that's barely floating. But until you actually know what's happening with families, you actually don't realize the challenges that they're facing. And I think this is one of the challenges that we face, is because our teams may not be fully aware then to have the insights to figure out what are the barriers that are happening and what are then the solutions that'll work.
That's absolutely a great comment. Thank you. So here's a piece that we worked on that we think might be helpful to you as you reflect on your team and how well it's doing. It lets you self-assess how you're doing, whether you're having a full school approach, and how you're doing on each of the 5 functions. So I encourage you to go to our website and download this tool and have a great conversation about where your team is and how you can strengthen it. Okay, so that was step 1 of our Pathways to Engagement Toolkit, building your team. And we just assume that many of you have ones that can be doing the work. So Hedy's going to talk a bit about identifying priority groups.
So one of the reasons why this is important is when you have large numbers of students, it's even less possible for that case management one-on-one approach to be effective, because you don't have enough resources to address all their needs. So part of why you want to identify a priority group is it allows you to think about a more systemic and a programmatic approach to addressing those needs. And you can then tailor according to that need. So if you know that you have a lot of kindergartners or 9th graders, for example, who are chronically absent, then that becomes your priority group. And you can think about how you can take and tailor your strategies to their realities. What happens when it's a kindergartner versus a 9th grader, for example, is going to look really different. How you would engage and support a kindergartner is going to be a lot more about what do you do to talk with their families, talk to their parents, deal with the fact the kid might not have ever been in any kind of formal school setting for the last 18 months and will have to experience that, versus a 9th grader, for example, who the problem is they don't feel any sense of connection to a high school. They're being worried about being bullied. You don't know what the issues are, but the starting point is to say, who are my priority groups? And then again, if you add in like ethnicity, it's African American students or Native American students who may have had challenging experiences with schools. Once you know who the priority group is, you might both be able to think about what are their likely challenges and realities, and who are the community partners who might be most in touch with those students. But the first step is figuring out who are those priority groups. So that's where, and we talked before about looking at contact, connectivity, relationships, participation data. You want to take that data. You also ideally want to break it down by school, grade, race, ethnicity, home language, disability, and zip code. We see, for example, right now, historically, English language learner students, for example, when they were little, young English language learners used to get to school even better than English speakers, to be honest. I think that has to do a whole lot with a sense of we worked so hard, struggled so hard to get to this country, so you would have access to an education, and I know how to get you there. I know how to drop you off at school, and you will be in school. And when distance learning happened, they might still feel like this opportunity for an education is important. But for families who don't speak English, who aren't familiar with technology, who may not have heard some of these terms, they don't even, like I've heard from my friends who speak Spanish that the term hybrid doesn't even really translate, you know, it's like a hard thing to explain. Then all of a sudden, I know how to get you there doesn't happen. So we've seen pretty extraordinary increases in chronic absence among English language learners. That's an example of identifying a priority group, but you know it because you looked at the data and then you broke it down. Sometimes it's also by zip code. Then you can, by the way, once you know where the chronic absence is really experienced, you can then use qualitative information, whether that's survey, whether that's focus groups, whether that's talking to the folks who are really connected, the community organizations to those families, to understand what are some of the contributing factors, how they might be addressed, and then how are you going to address the unequal access to resources that's happening. Next slide. Solutions really require making sure you understand what contributes to chronic absence. Is it those barriers? Is it aversion because the experience at school is actually a negative one or an unwelcoming one or not meeting needs? Is it disengagement? Because kids are finding school, whatever form it is, boring, or they are no longer accessing enrichment opportunities, or they don't have any relationships to adults, or is it misconceptions that just missing a couple of days doesn't matter? Or I have heard like, oh, that thing on the computer, that's not real school, so therefore my kids don't really need to show up, when it still actually matters because that's where we're teaching our content. So there's understanding what are the causes is what allows you then to come up with really with key interventions. And if you can find out a population, it's all of this group that's challenged, then what that allows you to do is you can go and tailor the strategy to that population without necessarily doing everything one-on-one, which you might not have the resources to do. Next slide, Cecilia. So I'm going to just offer up, these are some of the priority groups that we're starting to see: preschoolers and kindergartners, that middle school transition, that ninth grade transition, students and families challenged by poverty. Poverty has really exacerbated everything, not only because you don't have connectivity, but even if you do have a device, you might not have a house that's large enough for kids to spread out and have a place to learn from. Groups that have historically experienced oppression, discrimination, and bias, and don't trust as a result our school systems, they are often very affected. Homeless kids involved in foster care in the systems. These groups are often emerging as key priority groups that need more outreach. Next slide. I'd really be interested, for those of you who are with us, what groups are you seeing come up? Maybe it's one of the groups I mentioned, maybe it's a different group. And what are some of the insights you might have about that group? about why these kids might be disproportionately chronically absent. So if you might be willing to share in the chat. If someone wants to unmute and speak up, you can say that too. We got a pretty small group here. But what are you seeing? Or if this is something you still have to assess, you can mention that. I will say that a lot of times the groups, not all of them, there are some new groups, but some, a lot of times the groups who've historically been having challenges with chronic absence are the same groups now, but there are new ones. So Carlotta is sharing that in her community, it's English language learners. Carlotta, are there particular challenges you're seeing?
Mainly is the students and just the community itself. The parents are also, they're learning the language, they're adapting to the community. So sometimes the parents are unaware of the services that we do provide. So we've been doing a lot of calling on a weekly basis and not by, every other day. We have our staff letting them know that we're here for support. So now it's where our administrators are also doing calls and having those interventions with the parents and the students. And they have been coming in. However, that is our toughest group that we have, just to engage them overall.
Yeah. Rocio, you mentioned kids in alternative ed. Are there particular challenges for kids in alternative ed that you're seeing?
Yeah, I know with the virtual, it's really hard to get the students to log in. And I'm also a part of SARB, and that's the majority of students that we see that are coming to the, getting referred over to SARB. It's the students in alt ed. But I've also noticed a lot of the students that are getting put on contracts as well. They've had prior, issues with attendance, and it's just more now because it's virtual. But I feel it's students that have had issues since they were in elementary, and now they're in alt ed or middle school. So I feel like it's we really need to catch them when they're little and offer the family that support before it gets to that point where, and then I seen it as part of SARB is they're in high school, there's not much we can do now, and they kind of give up on the students. So it's definitely lack of support.
Absolutely. And Rocio, one of the things that I noticed often is sometimes this is actually family experience. I won't tell which one of my family members who had really struggled with this. But we wanted to put them in online learning when this was a people person. If this kid was going to get engaged, it was because they felt connected to human being who really cared about them. That's the times that this nephew of mine would normally, thrive. And then when the solution was to put them on kind of total distance learning, that this is even pre-COVID, we're thinking I'm not sure that's actually the solution here. This kid needs the structure. And so I think that kids who need structure and personalization to really help them show up, sometimes the online learning has done such a disservice because they haven't been finding ways to get engaged. Really appreciate that. And that's both even having even whether you had access, but those are also the kids who, if you are having troubles with Wi-Fi connections, school hasn't been so positive to make them work through all those challenges that creates. Well, this is really helpful. Appreciate seeing all these groups that you're mentioning, African Americans, unhoused kids. There's some real challenges. And we are definitely seeing that there are the kids who were having chronic absence before, there's now a group that have what we are starting to call extreme chronic absence. They didn't just miss 20% of the school year. They're missing half the school year. And what it's going to look like to bring them back is going to take some real thinking and investment and supports. Cecilia, I think I'm back to you. But you have to now unmute, dear. We'll take turns.
We're all being so respectful of each other that no one can hear us speak. Okay, thanks, Hedy. So we've gone through, the fact that you need a team, that you need to identify who your priority groups are. And clearly, they're top of mind for so many of you. And so the third piece that we want to share is the engagement strategies. And we've been releasing this in sections. One thing we've noticed during COVID is our own ability to absorb information is limited. So we put out for the spring, for the rest of the school year, some tools for nurturing a sense of belonging in school, right? Not every child has returned, not every student has returned, but we want to be able to bring them back. And we'll be releasing next month the second piece on building bridges to school during the summer, and in the fall, creating a sense of community at school. So let's go in depth a little, because we want to give you a sense of what the tools are in the Pathways to Engagement toolkit that you can take. So for the rest of this year, whether it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5, 6 weeks left to the school year, we want to really build and nurture a sense of belonging in school for the students who are there. And we have to intentionally sustain strong and caring relationships, continue to address some of the barriers that students are experiencing, and Hedy went through some of them, and certainly we can figure out more. We want to provide engaging activities to keep students motivated to show up to school. And I want to stop here and say, this is exactly where our extended learning opportunities can really kick in. Because as folks inside the school building or in the traditional teaching staff are feeling kind of tired and a little bit out of gas, this is where I think our providers can really pick up some of the slack and bring in excitement and engagement. And then this is our opportunity to enroll students, prospective students, those kindergartners or others who haven't been in school at all. So to help you with this, we offer a set of tools. One is the blank template to summarize what strategies you might have for creating a sense of belonging, how you want to prepare to execute those strategies, and what you might want to consider. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of our sample on the left of some just ideas of how you might want to come up with strategies for creating belonging. And I'd love to hear what you're already doing, because we don't imagine that you're just sitting around. We imagine that you're already doing quite a bit, and we'd love the chance to have everyone share with one another and get new ideas. So we've organized the worksheet in 3 sections so that it follows our tiered supports, so that you can be thinking about what you're trying to do for all students, what you're trying to do for some, your priority groups, and then what you're trying to do for a few. So Hedy, by the way, can I ask you to keep an eye on the time for me in case I get a little too excitable?
Yeah, we're fine, Cecilia.
Okay, thank you. All right, so those foundational strategies that Hedy talked about at the beginning of today's session, right? What do we want to do in terms of creating a sense of belonging right now, here in the rest of the school year in the spring? So for example, we might want to really be pushing hard on our enrollment campaigns, right? Whether it's outreach to prospective kindergartners or other students, whatever it is. So I would love to hear from you in the chat what strategies are going on in your school and community to enroll students. Be fascinated to hear that. And while you're answering, some of the ways that you can prepare is figuring out where you can do that recruitment, right? Who are the community and family partners who might be able to help? Where might people see notices, hear the invitation, find out how to enroll, right? It could be a local library because they're reopening in limited hours. It could be the pediatrician's office. It could be a community health center. So, you know, those are definitely places if you're going to be doing an enrollment campaign.
And Cecilia, can I just offer why this is part of belonging is you got to create a sense of belonging for the prospective kids as well as the current kids. We are seeing, you know, there's 160,000 fewer kids enrolled this past year in California. That's a huge number. So I'm assuming that some of your schools are affected by that. How do we make sure that kids, it's not just about knowing the procedures about enrollment, but feeling a sense that they belong in school next year, that they want to be in school next year. And so I don't know if there's any particular strategies that, and enrollment is one kind of strategy, but that you have for really connecting to those prospective students.
Let's go on and see what people might chime in. I think they'll get the hang of it as we keep going.
And I will, just before we do that, I'll offer one chime in, Cecilia. Like I've seen people doing virtual orientations already, even for kids, having them see what kindergarten would look like, really trying to make sure people recognize and are excited about coming back to school next year, even now, as a part of a strategy for enrollment.
Fantastic. And that reminds me, some of what you may be doing is an expansion of what you've been doing all year. So one of your neighbors near Hemet, I think Newview, I think it's the small school district in Southern California. Their counselors and support systems folks just did welcome videos and put them on their website. You know, this is who we are, this is what I do, we're so glad to see you, right? So that's one example. Okay, I'm not gonna go through every single one here, but I wanna key in on the second one.
I did want to acknowledge those to say before that Ni Chao wrote wellness check-ins, food and learning kits delivery, summer enrichment, and virtual tours.
Oh, fantastic. How do you do the virtual tours? Who's doing the virtual tours? Feel free to unmute and tell us if all the typing is getting on your nerves.
Yeah. Hi, it's me. I'm with the basic. I have a little one, so I'm muting myself. He's in the background. But in terms of virtual tours, what I'm hoping to do, the plan is to take video and then to kind of like walk, and then through the video, and then posting it and doing a virtual kind of like meeting with parents, and then showing like virtually what it looks like. So using a lot of video and just like our staff using, you know, just simply with the phone, you know, it's not high tech, but, you know, it's just allowing family to see what the campus looks like.
That's a great idea. And it's so important, especially given the fears and concerns families sometimes have about, will my child be safe in this new setting? What are you actually doing to make sure that kids are properly distanced, learn how to mask, etc. So some schools also are previewing those kind of routines as well.
So can I just call out, so Ni Chao, we're so glad that you could join from Ibesi. This is the East Bay Asian Youth Center. They operate in Oakland, and they've had a long historical partnership with a number of elementary schools, the middle school and high school, for a particular region, kind of the of Oakland. And we've seen over the years how that longstanding partnership, where the Ibesi staff even are the coordinators of the school attendance teams, are the teams that address attendance, and both running after school and summer school, expanded learning, and even parent leadership programs, has really positioned an agency to be a partner with schools in doing all of these things and creating a sense of belonging. So Neen, we're so glad you're here. We have long been admirers of the work of Ibesi.
All right. I didn't know you were from Ibesi. Yay. Okay. So for tier 1, I wanted to focus on this second piece down, the providing engaging end of the year activities to, you know, to I think get the fun level up, get the energy level up, and really create that sense of belonging and excitement. I was talking with the team in Sac City schools, and they're really focusing all their schools' efforts on end of year rituals. How are they going to do the things that are so meaningful to the identity of the school, right? Whether it's a certain kind of field trip, or it's a end of your middle school years, or it's the end of your high school years, or it's your transition from elementary to middle, whatever it is, they've been hard at work thinking through in their school teams what they're going to do, so that students really feel engaged, feel that they belong, and they're part of their school community. So that's a great example, and I'd love to hear what some of you are thinking about and who you're working with to do that. We've seen so many things, drive-through graduations, appreciations. This is Teacher Appreciation Week, and it's been very exciting. I've been deeply regretting my lack of a teacher credential to qualify for free coffee and at Pete's and all sorts of things like that. So what are all of you seeing? I see some things in the chat, and I have to rely on my reading eye partner.
They're not new ideas yet for this one, Cecilia. They're from previous conversations. So I don't know if folks want to add in what are some of the things that you're doing around universal prevention, rituals, any other kinds of activities that really help. And this is probably both the foundational supports and then universal activities that might be more focused on attendance. Sometimes folks are also at this point even still sharing out information with families about how much they've shown up in school. We have a comment from Hammond Tedla talking about planning a culture week.
Mm-hmm. How fun. Yeah, it's also, as we go down in terms of the ideas, and I see more coming in.
So virtual family events, paint nights, loteria, game nights. That's fabulous.
A lot of fun that creates a sense of engagement and belonging and connection. Those are awesome. The other piece that we've thought about is, really connecting with that summer enrichment as well as academic programming, right? This is the opportunity. Hedy and I interviewed someone yesterday from San Bernardino, and they're developing a summer program that's open to all, who want to attend. And it's not super long. It sounds like, what, 2-3 weeks, Hedy? Was what she shared?
I think it was a couple different sessions. I also want to offer up, and when we worked before with Roosevelt at EBASI, and this had come as an issue. One of the challenges for all of you who are in expanded or in summer learning program, then you're actually those providers. Sometimes the kids who need those programs the most aren't the ones, this was true before COVID, and I think may still hold true during COVID, aren't the ones who need the program as much as, and so you actually have to target outreach. So this is where it's both the universal part is you're creating the opportunity to be in the summer enrichment, and you're making it available to everyone so it doesn't feel stigmatized. It's exciting. I remember actually, this is again with EBASI, they actually started talking them as like clubs, or they were doing it as summer camps, kind of so that it wasn't seen as this, mandatory thing, but this fun thing for learning. But then the question is, can you use your data? Can you find ways so that you can ensure that students who you've seen a pattern of absenteeism, you've seen the challenges, they see themselves as being in this enrichment and they're attracted. And that may require a bit more extra thought and recruitment. You got to find, maybe it is in a group of kids so that the kids who are a group of kids you recruit because you could see they all have some of the same challenges, but you want them to really participate in that summer programming. So that's where universal and tier 2 interventions actually start connecting, because if we aren't careful, the kids who most need it might not participate.
That's right, Hedy. And it's so interesting too. We've seen many communities, for example, where the programming is exciting because it's culturally relevant. So when you think about freedom schools, for example, they're really a great example of something that works for particular groups and are often neighborhood-based and run by community-based organizations. So something like that also addresses both the targeted or tailored approach that you're talking about. See one more comment in there. Is that?
Oh, that was from Nee. She and
Oh,
I don't know if Nee.
You're able to type and talk at the same time. That's impressive.
She was commenting on my comment, but Nee, and you can see we're big fans. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys do in Basie to really recruit some of the more vulnerable kids to be part of your universal activities that you offer?
Yeah, so thanks, Hedy. So what we do is we work with the school in terms of looking at the data, right? In terms of attendance, and then attendance has their academics performance, right? And then what we do is that we do push in, but like you said, like we're looking at that. So the way that we enroll students is we want to target those students, like you said, but we also enroll students who are what we call like a opportunity for student leadership. And then so that way it's a mix of balance, right? And then the youth that we're trying to target, we're like, oh, it's gonna be fun. So get your friends, we haven't seen them, right? To make it fun. So basically being really intentional in terms of those outreach. And then there's also incentives that we have for students participation as well. Something that's we've done this year in particular is that we have weekly rally, and then those who are showing up and participating, we enter them into a raffle. And then there's also incentives, right? So they're making it more really, there's an incentive, like acknowledging like how hard it is for them to like even logging on to do that. And when we have the youth who are for the first like 10 minutes, you know, we have the youth enter the room and has music. And then whatever youth that we don't see, our staff is actually calling them, hey, just a reminder, so that everyone get a call, right? It's not just the students who are targeted, you know, but then they know, like, so then that way when everybody join the room is that everybody gets celebrated. So there's like to minimize that kind of, like you said, like the stigma or like, hey, the trouble kid or whatever you label it, right? And so to being able to celebrate the whole community, and then we start with the building intentional community curriculum too, where they do check-in for the day, and then they also do like a checkout, you know, the optimistic closure to build a community, a sense of belonging for the youth. So then, so everybody is actually part of this group, not just, you know, those who participate actively.
Love that strategy. Thank you so much for sharing. And the rest of you are probably getting a sense of why we're so high on Basie. Okay, let's look at a tier 2 example. And this is where we're looking at those priority student groups, right? So let's look at the second block here about connecting students who are chronically absent with a mentor or buddy, right? So in terms of implementation, one of the pieces that I love with Mentor is that they kind of flip it around. So instead of us saying we're going to impose a mentor on you, it's asking the student who they might want to connect with at the school. Well, who's the adult that they most admire, who they would love to be their champion or mentor, right? And we have success mentor materials, but I wonder what you all are doing or thinking or planning in terms of connecting your students, whether they're youth or younger students, with a caring adult. What's going on in terms of the strategies?
And Cecilia, I'm going to acknowledge that in the chat, one of the questions was whether or not what about youth voice? How do we encourage youth voice? And we can also open for that. Like, how do you? So I would also say with Success Mentors, One of the strategies is actually, so Cecilia already mentioned one strategy is asking youth who would they like to be their mentors, and then you reach out to those people and say youth were identifying you, which then also adds to the, I don't know, comment for other staff when they know that it's almost an honor to be a mentor, and it's giving youth a voice in that. The other piece we've seen is that youth actually are mentors themselves. And for example, in Fresno, we'll talk about our webinars that we've just been showing in the last, we launched with our attendance awareness campaign, but one of the mentors was a mentor from Fresno who was a senior in high school, and they have her as a mentor to kids. She's an immigrant who grew up not speaking English, learned to speak English, became a fluent English speaker. So she's actually a mentor to middle school kids who are experiencing the same challenges. And in this case, she's also a paid student mentor, so that really helps to, and she talked about it, helps her to think about how do you balance school and work. And it's an amazing example of where youth can in fact be in those kinds of leadership roles. I also wanted to, hey, Rocio, would you want to, this is a little bit off the mentoring part, but you were talking also about how you do youth leadership. Would you mind sharing a little bit?
Yeah, well, we were in person and we even continued it virtual. We've always had a student council at each of our sites in our after school programs. And it was one or two representatives from each grade. So everybody was represented, and they would meet with their coordinator like monthly, and then just, talk about, they would do check-ins and kind of put ideas out there, brainstorm for activities, for like their fun Fridays, for family events. And then they would have a student be like the secretary and take the notes. So everybody had a role, and then they'd go back and report back to their classroom and, listen to their students, and they would take notes back when they would meet with their class. So it was like they were representing the whole class. So it's not just them by themselves in a leadership role. It wasn't like a popularity contest, as sometimes, that could turn into that. We try to stay away from that and just really include everybody. And it's been very successful, and definitely gives the students that leadership. And a lot of the students who are like middle school, elementary, they would move on to middle school where we didn't have program. They would come back and volunteer, as you were saying, the volunteers, and they would still be like leaders. And we even had many students who've been in that role who come back and apply to work for us as program leaders. So that's kind of, I think, that the best thing to see is for our students to come back and then work for us. And then they're the program leaders working with their students. So it's kind of like full circle.
That's fabulous. I want to ask Cecilia to do me a quick favor, because I've just noticed we've had about 5 or 6 people who are completely new, and they entered within the last 5 or 10 minutes. Cecilia, could you do me a favor? Can we just go all the way up to the tiered support system? And I just want to give people a visual, because I think, Rocio, what you're talking about is a foundational. It's a combination of
so happy to do so. Everyone close your eyes. We're going to time warp and not make people dizzy. I'm going to go back.
Sorry. So what we have this vision of a diagram of what does it look like to support student attendance, and it's based on a tiered support system that allows you to think about what are the foundational supports you need to have in school, then what are tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 supports. And when I hear Rocio talking about, thank you, let's go back one more. Having youth leadership, we probably should say active engagement of families and youth in planning. That might be I think we were trying to be short on words, but because when that's part of what creates a foundation, right? When you have students actively designing your program, your educational supports, you're making sure the activities are engaging, that creates engagement. It also, I was hearing me talk about the fact that she sometimes recruits kids to be in leadership roles because you actually know you want to actually boost their engagement. And sometimes, hopefully I'm not putting words into her mouth, sometimes the kids, you can find kids who are struggling a little bit, and if you give them a leadership role, they will rise to that occasion. So you don't always want to look for the kids who volunteer to be leaders. You want to look for those kids who would benefit from being a leadership role. And then it becomes a little bit more of a tier 2 support, because you're actually supporting that. And can you go show, Cecilia, go back up to the whole pyramid for a second. So this is then thinking about what do you have to build in. So you create a leadership as part of foundational, but then who you recruit and how you support it, it's using and leveraging that opportunity as you think about where's just universal prevention sufficient, but who might need more tier 2 or who might need more tier 3. And I did want to make sure that everyone who was just joining us understood that this is the framework that we have for how do you improve attendance. Cecilia then talked about really creating a team. And then we're talking about how you use these phases of work. And Cecilia, maybe you can find where just before we go into our your grid, how we have phases which are starting with creating belonging in school, then going to bridges to school in the summer, and then having creating community at school. Thank you. We can go here for a second. Community at school in the fall. And we have just yet had a new person coming in, so hopefully you'll get a recording. This is what happens when you have classroom churn and people coming in and out. You you create a new opportunity for the folks who are teaching to kind of talk about make sure people are grounded. But
Let's
this
do
is
a quick check. You are seeing the pathways to engagement. Yes.
Yes, we're seeing the pathways to engagement. And Cecilia, I am now going to let you go back into this Pathways to Engagement toolkit that we had created and showing people the grid that we had. Sorry if this felt a little disjointed, but I felt some obligation to bring back in the new folks who came in the room and help them understand what we were talking about these days. And we right now we're talking about crafting engagement strategies.
Yeah, I thought we were just doing an empathy study for what it felt like to be a student coming in mid-year. But sure, happy to go back. Seriously, as a footnote to what Hedy was saying in terms of the youth leadership, we really do have an opportunity right now to use the plentiful one-time funding to support participation, right? So we know, for example, that many of the students who are not participating in school are youth who are working to provide income and to put food on the table and help their families, right? So when we actually intentionally build in stipends or wages or some sort of financial compensation for young people to become leaders, to become peer mentors, to help do the work, it really actually kills two birds with one stone. I'm a big fan of buy one, get one free when I go to the grocery store. And I would encourage you to think about ways in which you can leverage some of the funding that you have to both bring in youth voice, provide meaningful work, and solve some of the issues that are keeping our kids out of the school building. Not because they don't care about education, but because they have to weigh helping their families versus getting an education. And anytime we can take that away and have both happen, what a win. It's a win-win. A win-win-win? Something like that. Okay, so where were we, Hedy? We were in tier 2, and we had just talked about the mentoring. Do we have time to do tier 3? Let me check with you.
I would just offer one other thing that we put in here. Part of tier 2 is also about monitoring your data to notice kids. And this isn't just about targeting who was chronically absent from school in the previous year, but while you're working with kids in the summer, you should be monitoring their attendance data, because it's an opportunity for you to notice when kids are actually having a hard time reestablishing that routine for in-person learning. And maybe that's because, and I can say, because I live in San Francisco, oh my God, our public transportation there might have been challenges before, but oh my God, right now, public transportation is a mess. So maybe the challenges around the transportation, maybe they're experiencing, or maybe their family hasn't been able to get access to healthcare and COVID vaccines, and they're actually experiencing a lack of access to healthcare. So if you can monitor your data, it actually helps you to identify kids. So both target kids who maybe need more support for the summer, and then continue to monitor what's happening with them over the summer. And that means that right now, as you're thinking about putting in place summer programming, you're going to have to figure out what your professional development will be for your expanded learning providers. I do think there's a lot of benefits to expanded learning providers. Expanded learning providers often are more from the community than the teaching staff. They often speak the home languages of kids more often than the teaching staff. Sometimes they're younger and near the youth leaders, near peer, which can have some really wonderful modeling of a near peer that a near peer can offer. But I also wouldn't assume that they consider monitoring their attendance data. Or I started off the beginning saying that we have to so move away from punitive action. We have to make sure that when a kid misses school, our question is, what happened and how can I help you? Not like, God, you didn't even care enough to show up to class. And I will not guarantee that an expanded learning provider is necessarily going to take that positive, problem-solving, empathetic, trauma-informed approach. I don't think we should make assumptions, especially because people are often, they've actually experienced a little trauma this year. So sometimes even when we know better, we tend to be short with each other, even when it might not be the most relationship building thing. And so I think that investing in your expanded and summer learning providers and program providers so that they can use their attendance data, that they can support outreach, that they have access to resources to support so that when families experience challenges, they know where they can connect families to. This is the time to be thinking about who's equipped to offer those activities, who's already offering those activities, and then how do we make sure that they can equally leverage and support the positive attendance habits. Because for a lot of kids who've been out of school for what, a year, more, 15 months, this is going to be their first chance to be together in an in-person learning environment and get that experience coming back to school before you actually have to be back at school in the fall.
So really treating summer as practice for the students, right?
Absolutely.
And practice for us adults in learning to walk together. Little footnote on what you were saying about the combined professional development. I think the wonderful thing we've all learned is we actually can do a lot more on Zoom or online than we ever thought we could, right? Witness today in this entire virtual conference. And that Zoom rooms are much bigger. So there's no limitation physically in having more people attend. So
and you can record them just in case the PD happened at a time when they couldn't show up.
Absolutely. So all those things are positives, and that really equips all of us to really be working as a team and doing the same thing in terms of monitoring. Okay, well, we're gonna quickly go through the rest, and I want to make sure I leave time for Hedy at the end to talk about the rest of the attendance awareness campaign. So for tier 3, let's do one more round of this. So these are for our students who are missing a lot of school or who have missed a lot of school. And one of the strategies we thought about is doing possibly a home visit, right? And you know, what are the other ways that you have reached out to students who've missed a lot of school? I heard earlier from Rocio about you know, SARBs and such, but are there other strategies you all are using? So the home visits are an example, but you may be doing something else. And if you're doing something really exciting and effective, we really want to hear about it.
one thing we've also heard about, this is pre-COVID, but I think it's still holding true now, from like foster ed, which operates here in California, is you actually identify different champions. So a champion from a kid's family, a champion from the system, like if they're in the juvenile justice or the foster care system, and a champion from the school system. And all three champions have actually access to a student's data so that they can notice when the kid's missing school, or figuring out how they can collaborate when there's a barrier that they're all noticing. And I'm also seeing from the chat something from Heyman. She's saying that we currently transitioned our campus safety team to attendance strike team to make calls daily to students that are absent and provide support. I do think the daily part is really important. This isn't a one-shot event. This is relationship building over time. Heyman, do you want to offer any other insights that you've gained from doing that?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So when the pandemic hit, obviously we had to transition some of our staff to virtual, and the way we utilized our campus safety team was to make it into our attendance team. And what we do is we run reports every 2 hours of students that are absent.
2 hours.
Every
Wow.
2 hours, because our safety team is made up of 9 personnel. So we figured we would break down grade levels and really connect with students and ask them, why were they absent? You know, one of our first question is, what can we support you with? Are you having technology issues? Are you having other things that are hindering you to get to log in? So based on that interaction, you know, our students relayed a lot of information. And that quickly became such a success. Parents were really excited that we were calling. We decided this is working. Let's run reports, check who's absent for the day, and let's connect with them. So it's been working well for us while we're virtual. I hope we continue it in the future, but again, personnel issues may be, you know, one of our challenges, but you know, getting to know our families, getting to know our students and their challenges during this time really helped us to better our attendance.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, and you know, a really smart way of using the staff that you had who weren't doing what they traditionally do, right? Perfect. Okay, we're near the end of our time, and I want to make sure that you see the rest of the toolkit and know what else we invite you to join us for in the attendance awareness campaign. So the last piece of these engagement grids are communications, right? So it's just a summary of what it is that you might be communicating about through all the different tiers of engagement, right? It may be you want to communicate about enrollment, or where families can go for help, or how to sign up for summer programming, or what resources can be obtained through the school. And thinking through how to communicate, right? Using trusted messengers. I love the example from Alameda City Schools here that Hedy and I heard recently, where they really used trusted messengers, African-American doctors and clergy, to reach out to families that really were hesitant and concerned about the safety of bringing their kids back after or in the midst of a pandemic, right? But think through how you'll communicate, who will do it, the mode, etc. And then whether you have some special considerations you want to take into account about where people are getting their information. So those are great examples. And for you, as you plan your outreach and engagement strategy, think through each piece as well and use the templates to help organize your work. So as we said, we are releasing in 3 phases. The next one is coming up for summer. It's about building bridges to school and some of the steps that you want to be taking through the summer. And then the last piece is creating community at school. Once hopefully we brought our students back. We want them to stay. We want them to continue with good attendance. So what will we do to reestablish our routines and rituals so that everyone feels connected and socially and emotionally ready to learn? And what are we going to do in terms of partnering? We probably have built some great partnerships this year, maybe over the summer. What do we want to continue into the fall and expand? And how will we keep sustaining our relationships? What structures will we use? And what can we bring back for those of us who are coming back in person, right? Whether they're advisories or councils or such. So that's the Pathways to Engagement Toolkit. We have worked really hard, and I think in a very disciplined way, not to inundate you with words, but just to give you the tools that we think will be most useful to you as you transition back from a very unusual school year into one that hopefully looks a little more like what we're all used to and hoping for. So Hedy, do we have time for a few questions before we wrap
We have
up?
6 minutes till the end, so we probably could. Don't know if there's either questions or examples. We've really appreciated a few of you pitching in with some of the stories for how you've done the work. There's really some fabulous work going on throughout California. And so feel free to, if you want to unmute or you want to chat, either way. While you're thinking about whether you want to offer anything, why don't we go to the next slide?
Yes, and I saw Hedy, by the way, has put in the link to the Pathways to Engagement Toolkit. So do go explore and enjoy.
And we also just wanted you to know we have launched our 9th annual attendance awareness campaign. So this is Rebound with Attendance. And now we've given chance for Diane to raise her hand. Diane, please unmute.
What's on your mind?
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation so much. We've just seen, this issue being exacerbated in so many ways, especially in our rural communities and continuation schools, for sure, as Rocio mentioned. And I was just wondering, we're really looking at the potential to provide learning hubs and community-based learning hubs, specifically for those students who have been very disengaged with their school communities, and also as a means to support our really stretched community school locations. What do you think about using off-site community learning hubs to provide more wrap type supports and youth engagement strategies for students like this?
I think it's essential, Diane. The learning hubs, one, I think sometimes students may have a different relationship to offsite places. It might even be that they'll feel a little bit more comfortable coming in. We're going to actually be highlighting a group. Cecilia, go to the next slide for just a second. We have these 4 different webinars. In the next slide about using summer to connect with students. One of the presentations is going to be by a group called El Puente. They're in New York City, and they offer, they've been running learning hubs all year long, but even their community-based organizations, because in New York City, they had done K-8 learning hubs, but they didn't create them for high school students, but El Puente serves a lot of high school students and middle school students, and they've become the de facto learning hub for some of these students, particularly the ones who had challenges showing up to school in person. And they also use their learning hubs as an opportunity. They created a whole health and assessment team. So in addition to the people who are offering the space and the learning hubs and ensuring about the connectivity and making sure the kids had a safe place to learn, they're actually reaching out to families and figuring out whether there are other challenges and issues that the families are facing, whether that's housing, transportation, whatever. And because they're a community-based site, they were able to do that. The other thing is they were able to stay open consistently, even when schools have had to close. And so it's created this stability. And because they have an ongoing and long-standing relationship to the community, there is a trust in that community organization in explaining to them some of the challenges. And they have families, for example, who are dealing with immigration status issues. They may not feel comfortable talking to a school staff person about that, but because of the longstanding relationship with their organization, they do feel comfortable talking about that. And certainly concerns and fears about immigration can absolutely affect kids' attendance. So I think it's really taking full advantage then of what you can do when you have community partners, both offering off-site, but have a depth of connection and relationship that might allow them to reach to families in a different way than the school system can.
And particularly in rural, it makes such a difference, right? You want to be someplace where if the families are essential workers, for example, that the children have supervision, and that there's some place that's climate controlled and there's Wi-Fi if that's necessary. So all those reasons, learning hubs are fantastic and so important for our students. Okay, I think we are near the end of our time. Hedy, do you want to say one more word about the webinar?
I just wanted to say we have these webinars. This is our ability to offer for free to everyone our resources and inspiring examples of different places that have made a difference and have, so for example, for webinar 2, we'll be talking with El Puente, which is in New York City. We'll also be talking with a woman named Emily Parton, who runs a family resource center out in Appalachia. So quite the rural area. Actually, no, you know what, we're going to be talking with Taylor Redfield. No, Emily Parton, sorry. I'm writing too many of these. And then we'll also be having the National Summer Learning Association talking about what are the resources and supports it's offering. So that's all in webinar 2. Please join us. And then we'll have webinars in August and September that all follow along that same create belonging in school, build bridges to school, create community at school. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Yes, we really appreciated your time and attention and your stories. I understand that there is an evaluation link that is in your welcome packet. Please do fill it out. Our organizers would really appreciate hearing from you, how things serve your needs and how to improve. So thank you all, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Take care.